Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, jurors.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Trooper Michael Proctor, Proctor.
How are you employed, sir?
I am currently assigned to the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office in the Homicide Unit within the Massachusetts State Police.
Trooper, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up loud, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, how long have you been a trooper with the state police?
For about 10 years. It'll be 5 years in September with the Homicide Unit.
With reference to your work with the homicide unit with the district attorney's office, what specialized training did you receive in regard to your work within that unit?
I've attended several homicide schools. I've also been certified in Celebrite software programming. I've also, in addition to homicide investigations, have worked within the narcotics unit, several different investigations there as well.
With respect to your work with the detective units, do you have an on-call system?
We do.
Can you explain to the jury how that works or how those specific days for your on-call duties are assigned?
Sure. Sergeant Bukhenik usually sets the on-call rotation. It's at random, and your on-call is from 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. Any unattended death, homicide, suicide, overdose, things of that nature that comes in during that time frame, you own it. That's your call.
Were you working in that capacity with the detective units on January 29, 2022?
Yes.
And at some point in the morning, did you receive a call in regard to a situation in the town of Canton?
I did.
When did you first receive that call?
Sergeant Bukhenik called me at approximately 6 that Saturday morning, advised that Canton PD had a male party that was discovered in the snow outside of a residence, and he wasn't sure what had happened. It was originally given to me as a possible medical situation.
And based on that initial call and that initial information that you received, what did you do? You contacted Detective Sergeant Lang.
Correct.
Following that, you reached out to whom? I'm sorry?
This firefighter, Anthony.
With reference to that conversation, what did you learn from that?
I knew I needed to gather further information, so I contacted Detective Lank from Canton Police Department to see exactly what transpired in the morning. He had informed me that a male party had been transported to Good Samaritan Hospital with some injuries. Detective Lank didn't have much more information, so I knew I needed to contact the paramedic at the hospital, the individual who's treating Mr. O'Keefe.
As Detective Sergeant Lank was concerned, was that someone that you called on your own, or how did you get his information, or why did you call him specifically?
I knew he was on scene, so I called Detective Lank.
So that was some information that you had received at some point earlier, and you contacted Detective Sergeant Lank.
Correct.
Following that, you reached out to whom? I'm sorry?
This firefighter, Anthony.
With reference to that conversation, what did you learn from that?
Firefighter Flamati informed me that Mr. O'Keefe had some injuries to his right arm, some abrasions to his right arm, some injuries to his eyes, a cut to the nose area. He put a 10% chance of survival for Mr. O'Keefe.
Based on that information, who did you call next?
Contacted Sergeant Bukhenik, advised him that this sounds like it's more than a medical situation.
What decision did you and Sergeant Bukhenik come to with regard to what to do or where to go or what the next steps should be?
So there's a couple different steps. Number one, it was blizzard conditions, and we operate Ford Fusions or Chevy Malibu. So we got authorization to use our personal vehicles that are four-wheel drive and to meet at Canton PD and to speak with the responding officers.
About what time was it that you and Sergeant Bukhenik arrived at the Canton Police Department?
It was approximately 10 a.m. that morning.
Whereabouts were you at about 8:22 in the morning?
Home.
Had you shoveled out of your driveway at that time?
Not yet.
Had you cleaned off your car at that time?
No.
So you arrived at the Canton Police Station about 10 a.m. or so. When was it that you arrived in relation to Sergeant Bukhenik?
At Canton PD?
Yes.
I don't recall if Sergeant Bukhenik arrived first or myself.
Suffice it to say, at some time you both arrived around 10 a.m., is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And where did you go with the police when you arrived there?
We spoke with the Sergeant Sean Good.
What did you learn from Sergeant Good?
Sergeant Good informed us that while he was on scene, he identified Kerry Roberts, Jennifer McCabe, Karen Read. He informed us that Jennifer McCabe was out early in the night at a waterfall bar in Canton with some individuals, and she was the one who called 911 when they found Mr. O'Keefe in the snow that morning.
With regard to the parties that you just mentioned, prior to January 29, 2022, had you ever met or were you aware of either Jennifer McCabe or Kerry Roberts or Karen Read or John O'Keefe?
I've never met any of them.
At some point, did you have occasion to meet and speak with Ms. Read?
Yes,
Do you see Ms. Read in the courtroom today?
I do.
Just for clarification purposes, if you could identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing.
She's seated between Mr. Jackson and Mr. Yannetti wearing a pinstripe sport coat.
After you speak with Sergeant Good, did you speak with anybody else at the Canton Police Station?
No.
Where did yourself and Sergeant Bukhenik go from there?
We then traveled to the home of Matthew and Jennifer McCabe.
With reference to when I say you and Sergeant, how long a period of time was it that you were with Sergeant Bukhenik on that date of January 29th?
From 10 a.m. approximately, we met at Canton Police Department until we returned to the Canton Police Department that afternoon around 5:30 in the afternoon. So all day, and we also had a debrief meeting with just the troopers in my office at Canton PD. So at least from 10 to 6, 7, because we also went back to the office with some evidence.
So from that entire time, from 10 in the morning until later on in the night, other than maybe short drives in individual cars, were you essentially with Sergeant Bukhenik that entire day?
Yes, we used Sergeant Buchenek's pickup truck that entire day. I left my personal vehicle at the police department, and I rode with Sergeant Bukhenik all day and into the evening.
From the Canton Police Station, where did you and Sergeant Bukhenik go?
The McCabe's house in Canton.
Who did you speak with there?
We spoke with Matthew and Jennifer McCabe, as well as Brian Albert.
Those interviews, how were they conducted?
One-on-one, Sergeant Bukhenik and myself rotated out Jennifer, Matthew, and Brian. So first we interviewed Jennifer, and then once that was completed, we had her step out, go to a separate room, brought in Matthew, and then the same thing with Brian.
For the balance of the interviews that you conducted several interviews over the course of your investigation in this case, is that correct?
Correct.
For those interviews, as far as individually done, was that primarily what you did with each of the people that you interviewed over the course of the investigation?
Yes, each interview conducted was either with Sergeant Bukhenik or another trooper in one-on-one, with the exception of Julie and Chris Albert, I believe, were in the same room as us.
As far as each of the interviews that you conducted over the course of your investigation, was there an interview that you conducted just by yourself?
There was just one.
Who was that one that you conducted by yourself?
That took place just at the grand jury across the street. It was the Currans. I had some difficulty locating them, so when they appeared for grand jury, I interviewed them one-on-one by myself prior to their testimony at grand jury.
You had attempted to meet with them prior to them coming to the grand jury, is that correct?
Yes,
They had not been responsive to that.
correct.
However, they were responsive to the summons, so you interviewed them before they went into the grand jury, correct?
Yes.
Other than those, as Mr. and Mrs. Curran, every interview that you conducted was in the presence of at least one other trooper?
Correct.
As far as you mentioned one name that we hadn't discussed before at the McCabe household, a Brian Albert. Prior to January 29th, had you ever met or were you aware or did you know?
And I've met Brian Albert until that interview.
Following the interviews that you conducted at the McCabe household, where did you go from there?
After the interviews at the McCabe household, Sergeant Bukhenik and I traveled to Good Samaritan Hospital for two reasons. One, we knew Miss Read was there receiving treatment for Section 12. Two, we wanted to view Mr. O'Keefe.
When you arrived at the Good Samaritan Hospital, was the defendant, Miss Read, still at that facility at that time?
We had spoke with the security staff at Good Samaritan Hospital. They informed us that Miss Read was released.
I'll allow it, just as to where you went.
That Miss Read was released several hours prior to our arrival.
Do you know about what time it was that you arrived, yourself and Sergeant Bukhenik, at the Good Samaritan?
Maybe approximately 1 o'clock.
You mentioned there was a second reason, and that was to view Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
That's correct.
Did you have occasion or did you have a chance to view Mr. O'Keefe's body at the Good Samaritan?
We did.
Where was that within the hospital?
I was in the emergency room.
When you went to where Mr. O'Keefe was, can you describe for the jury what observations you made of Mr. O'Keefe's body at the time that you observed?
The first thing I noticed on Mr. O'Keefe, he had abrasions on his right arm. On the top of his right arm, there's approximately 6 to 8, ranging from his forearm to his lower bicep. There was no injuries underneath that forearm. Both eyes were swollen and black and blue. He had a cut on, I believe it was his right nostril, another smaller cut, I believe it was on his left eye. Those were the injuries that kind of jumped out to me.
At any point in time, did you make any observations of the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head while you were there?
I did observe blood on the back of the head. I wasn't able to tell if there's any significant trauma to the back of his head.
From the Good Samaritan Hospital, yourself and Sergeant Bukhenik, what items did you secure in evidence from the Good Samaritan Hospital?
So after we viewed Mr. O'Keefe's body, we observed a pile of clothes in the corner that hospital staff had cut off Mr. O'Keefe and piled into the corner. The one thing that had jumped out to both of us was one sneaker. It's fairly common in a motor vehicle pedestrian strike that
Jane, I'll strike from fairly common, the observations.
As far as the clothing that you observed, can you describe the clothing that you...
Yes. We observed one black sneaker with the Nike logo, a pair of blue jeans, a belt, boxer shorts, an orange t-shirt, and a two-tone gray, light kind of hooded sweatshirt type of material.
Trooper Proctor, over the course of your career responding to unattended deaths or death investigations as a detective of a unit, how many of those have involved situations where a pedestrian was struck by a motor vehicle?
I've been in the unit 3 or 4, and then I've other experiences on the road.
As far as the other experiences on the road, can you expound upon those as far as how many or what time period we're talking about?
About 6 years I spent on the road, so maybe another 3 or 4.
With reference to those pedestrian crashes, what have you seen in those prior investigations in regard to sneakers or foot of pedestrians involved in motor vehicle crashes?
I'm going to see you at sidebar.
With reference to your prior experience with pedestrian crashes involving motor vehicles, what observations have you made on those prior occasions in regard to the foot with respect to the pedestrians in motor vehicle crashes?
In those experiences, I've observed one, if not both, pieces of footwear remained at the point of impact.
With respect to your observations of the clothing, there only being one sneaker at Mr. O'Keefe's property, what significance did that have to you as far as the steps you took subsequent in your investigation?
That was just a little piece of evidence that Sergeant Bukhenik and I picked up, that only one piece of footwear revealed the potential of a vehicle strike.
In addition to, Sergeant Bukhenik is one of your supervisors within the detective unit, is that correct?
Yes,
There's another one, a Lieutenant Brian Tully.
that's correct.
With respect to the one sneaker that was found in Mr. O'Keefe's property, what did you communicate to Lieutenant Tully?
Objection.
As to how it goes to the investigation,
Yes.
I'll allow it.
Sergeant Bukhenik and I informed DLT Tully that there was one shoe at the hospital.
With respect to Detective Lieutenant Tully, are you aware that subsequently in the afternoon that there was a search that was conducted in the area of 34 Fairview Road where Mr. O'Keefe was found?
Yes,
Are you aware of what was recovered in the area where Mr. O'Keefe was found on that day?
Objection.
I'll allow it as to the investigation.
yes.
What are you aware?
Sergeant Bukhenik and I were informed that CERT team and Detective Lieutenant Tully discovered a black Nike sneaker with the white swoosh logo that was a match to Mr. O'Keefe's shoe at the hospital.
What else did you observe about what kind of clothing and the condition of the clothing that you observed at the hospital?
The clothing seemed, it was wet. It was pretty well saturated. The right sleeve had some cuts to it, like tears to it. There was like blood and vomit on it, if I recall. Those were the observations I had made of the clothing. And they had been cut due to rendering first aid as well, the pants area.
Subsequent to viewing these clothing items at the hospital, at a later time, did you have occasion to observe surveillance video from a variety of places on the evening of January 28th into the early morning of January 29th, depicting Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
What did you note with regard to the clothing that you observed at the hospital and the clothing that you observed in the video?
So the videos I reviewed at C.F. McCarthy's bar and the Waterfall bar were the same clothes Mr. O'Keefe was wearing that Sergeant Bukhenik and I had secured at Good Samaritan Hospital.
As far as securing items and evidence within your unit, how is that accomplished? How is that done? What do you do with items that you deem of evidentiary value that you then secure?
Generally, if we take an item for evidence, we'll put it in a brown paper bag, document it, time, date, who secured that item, address, where it's discovered, and we'll bring that back to our office, to the evidence processing area. From there, it'll go to a permanent evidence room that has triple retention. It has an actual key card and an actual access code. Only 3 members of my office have access to that room, the 2 evidence officers and Detective Lieutenant Tully.
At this time, on January 29th, 2022, who was assigned as the evidence officers who had access to that room?
So that'd be Trooper David Ichico and Trooper Jeffrey Kukowski.
Did either yourself or Sergeant Bukhenik have any access to that evidence storage?
No.
With reference to these items that were seized and, say, items that were seized subsequent during the course of your investigation, did they go through that same evidentiary storage process that you were speaking about before?
Yes.
In addition to the clothing items, at some point did you come into possession and seize Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
Yes.
Do you recall where it was that you received or retrieved Mr. O'Keefe's phone from?
We received it at the Canton Police Department
Was that prior to you going to the Good Samaritan?
after, I believe.
So following the Good Samaritan, where did you go from there?
So after the Good Samaritan Hospital, Sergeant Bukhenik and I traveled to 345 Country Hill Drive in Dighton.
Why did you go to that location?
That was the residence of Miss Read's parents' home. Having a brief conversation with Miss Read on the phone, she informed us she was at her parents' house.
So you had called Ms. Read, spoken to her, and informed her that you were coming there to speak, correct?
Correct.
Just as you had done with Ms. McCabe, Mr. McCabe, you spoke to Ms. Read within her home?
Yes.
Who else did you reach out to on your way there with regard to local law enforcement as you were driving to Dayton?
We contacted the Dayton Police Department just for a couple of reasons. One, it's a common courtesy. If we're in another town, we just give the local PD a heads up. But also we needed to coordinate a plow truck and potentially a tow truck as well.
Why did you need to coordinate those?
At the time, there must have been at least a foot of snow on the ground, more, and it was a dead-end cul-de-sac, which made it difficult to navigate. So we requested the plow to clear a path for Sergeant Bukhenik and I to get down the roadway, as well as clear the driveway of the residence so the tow truck could pull into the driveway.
As far as the drive from Good Samaritan, that's in Brockton, is that correct?
Yes.
From Good Samaritan Brockton to the defendant's parents' home in Dayton, about how long a drive was that, and how would you describe the weather conditions along the way?
The weather conditions were whiteout, high winds, blizzard conditions. We had to travel very slow. It was almost about an hour to get there.
When you arrived there, you were in Sergeant Buchanik's truck, is that correct?
Correct.
Where did Sergeant Buchanik position the truck in relation to the house at 345 Country Hill?
From what I recall, Sergeant Bukhenik went down the cul-de-sac and turned around, and he actually had to let me out first because of the high snowbanks, and then he parked along the snow, pointing essentially to Mr. Reed's house.
At some point, did members of the Dayton police come along and join?
Yes.
Do you recall who those people were?
I believe one of the officers' last name was Barros or Barrio.
Had you ever met that officer before?
No.
With respect to the home, had you and Sergeant Buchanik approached the home at any point prior to the Dayton police showing up?
They had arrived first before we approached the home.
When you approached the home, how did you get from the street to the home?
We walked down the driveway, and then we observed Miss Reed's Lexus parked in the driveway, the front of it facing one of the garage doors, and that's when we observed the broken taillight on the right side of the vehicle. We then proceeded to the front door. The snow was about up to our waist, and knocked on the door and was greeted by Mr. Reed.
As you're walking up the driveway towards the home, Miss Reed's vehicle, is that correct?
That's
That's a vehicle that you later subsequently found to be registered to Miss Karen Read, is that correct?
correct.
I'm showing you 4 pages in length. Do you reckon that document, sir?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
The Registry of Motor Vehicles, it's the certified document for Miss Reed's Lexus.
Is that the plate information that's contained in there, is that the same plate that was affixed to Miss Reed's vehicle on that day?
Yes.
That also details the history or how long she's had possession of that vehicle, is that fair to say?
Correct.
Going back to, I believe, 2021, is that correct?
Yes.
With respect to Ms. Reed, at some point you go into the house, is that correct?
Yes.
How do you enter into the defendant's parents?
So Sergeant Bukhenik and I, after we had knocked on the front door, Mr. Reed directed us around the corner, opened up the garage door for us, and invited us in.
If I could take you back to when you're coming up the driveway and you're passing by the defendant's vehicle, you mentioned some damage that you observed to the right rear passenger side area, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you describe to the jury what it was specifically that you observed as far as damage to that area of the vehicle?
Yeah, the right rear taillight had large pieces missing from it.
So you proceed inside the home, and where is it that you're directed, and where is the defendant?
We're invited into a large living room area. Miss Reed is seated on a couch. Her parents, William and Janet, are present for the conversation and kind of standing off to the side.
That conversation goes on for approximately how long?
Approximately half hour, 40 minutes.
When you terminate that conversation, you come back outside of the home, is that correct?
Yes.
Where is the vehicle at this point?
That is being put on the tow truck.
In addition to the defendant's vehicle, what else was taken and seized as evidence from the defendant on that morning?
After confirming the phone Miss Reed was holding was in fact hers, we told her we were seizing the phone and we'd be writing a search warrant for that.
During the course of the conversation that you and Sergeant Bukhenik had with the defendant that afternoon at her parents' home in Dayton, were there some questions in relation to contact information for other people that were at bars or different establishments the night before?
Yes, we asked Miss Reed specifically for some of the friends that Mr. O'Keefe was with at C.F. McCarthy's. One person in particular was Michael Camerano. We observed Miss Reed enter the passcode on her phone, retrieved Mr. Camerano's phone number for us, provided to us, and that just further confirmed that was her cell phone.
Through your training experience, when a cell phone is seized from a person, what is it that you do with regard to that cell phone to preserve the information on?
First thing we do is we put it in airplane mode, and then we give it to a cell phone expert in our office, Trooper Nicholas Garino, and he essentially tries to access the data data in that phone once a search warrant is obtained.
As far as putting that cell phone in what you described as airplane mode, what is the purpose of that?
It's to avoid if someone wants to go on a tablet or a laptop and access the information on their phone and they can start deleting stuff off their iCloud. This prevents that.
So you secure the phone, you secure the vehicle on the tow truck, and then where did you and Sergeant Bukhenik go from there?
We followed the tow truck from the address in Dayton to the Canton Police Department. We're secured in the Sallyport Bay.
Approximately what time was it that you arrived at the Canton Police Department and secured the defendant's vehicle in the Sallyport Bay?
So we left Dayton around 4:16 p.m. and arrived in Canton at the police department at approximately 5:31 p.m.
With reference to the Canton Police Department's Sallyport garage, why was the vehicle taken there?
I wasn't part of that decision, but it's my understanding that it was a heated facility. The other options were, I believe, the barracks in Milton, but that's not large enough to house a vehicle that size, and it's not heated.
In regard to the heated, what was the purpose or utility of storing it in a heated setting?
Miss Reed's vehicle was covered with snow and ice at the time. It was transported from Dayton to Canton.
With regard to the Sallyport garage area of the Canton Police Department, at some point were you inside that area?
Yes.
What observations did you make as far as the temperature or the heating within that facility?
I remember the exact, I couldn't put a ballpark on temperature, but it was certainly warmer than outside.
As far as the vehicle was concerned, either on scene, either in Dayton or at the Sallyport garage, or at any point in time that you were in the presence of that vehicle, what contact did you have? What did you do or observe Sergeant Bukhenik to do with regard to that damaged area you described on the right rear passenger side?
Yeah. Sergeant Bukhenik and I never touched any part of that vehicle.
As far as the moving it from the tow truck into the Sallyport area, how was that accomplished?
The tow truck driver removed it from the tow truck and pulled it into the Sallyport Bay.
Prior to leaving that Sallyport area of the garage where the vehicle was, what did you and Sergeant Bukhenik do with reference to securing that vehicle or coordinating it off in any way, shape, or form?
We tried to set up a perimeter as best we could using caution tape, just sectioned it off with the caution tape.
At some point, you leave the Sallyport area, the Canton Police Station, and where did you go from there?
We had a debrief meeting, so there's other troopers. There's troopers at scene on 34 Fairview Road. There's other troopers conducting interviews. So at the end of the night, members of my office met in a conference room at the Canton Police Department to exchange information as far as what everyone had learned throughout the day.
As far as that meeting is concerned, that's just troopers from your unit, from your office, is that correct?
That's correct.
So there were no members of the Canton Police Department that were present for that, is that correct?
No, correct.
Do you know why that was?
They had taken a step back from the investigation. They weren't going to participate in any interviews or anything of that nature.
How was that communicated to you and Sergeant?
The best of my recollection was that debrief meeting that we were informed that essentially Canton PD would be taking a step back from the investigation and that now this is just solely a Norfolk State Police investigation.
Before we get to debriefing and all that's covered in that, as far as when you're on call, you get a call for any kind of homicide or unattended death or anything like that. You then become what's called a case officer for that investigation, is that correct?
Correct.
Can you describe for the jury sort of what the duty or the role is of the case officer vis-a-vis the rest of the members of the unit?
So essentially a case officer is more of a facilitator, delegate out tasks, coordinate interviews. The case officer isn't the sole decision maker. I have supervisors that we bounce ideas off of, I get feedback from. I also keep them updated. It's a collaborative effort. In each investigation, we're a small office, so when a homicide comes in, everyone essentially drops what they're doing. We all work on it together. So it's a collective effort to work on these cases, and essentially a case officer is just the record keeper of all the reports that come in and video comes in. But when it comes down to decision-making time, it's a group effort.
With reference to that collaborative effort that you were just discussing in this debriefing meeting, there were other troopers doing other things or other tasks throughout the course of the day of the 29th, correct?
Yes.
What was the purpose of, or not specifically what was discussed, but in general terms, what was discussed during the course of this debriefing?
The taillight piece is found at 34 Fairview Road by CERT. The one sneaker found at 34 Fairview Road. Interviews conducted, and then Sergeant Bukhenik and I also shared everything we had learned throughout the day as well.
That debriefing meeting, if you know about how long approximately did that take in this case?
Can't recall, maybe half hour.
So following that meeting, where did you go from there?
Sergeant Bukhenik and I had secured some evidence, the clothing from Good Samaritan Hospital, the additional sneaker found at 34 Fairview Road, as well as the taillight pieces discovered at 34 Fairview Road. Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone and Miss Reed's cell phone. Him and I transported those to the office in Canton.
When you transported them to the office in Canton, what did you do with those items?
The 2 cell phones were given to Trooper Nicholas Garino, and the clothing was laid out on top of butcher paper to dry out in our evidence intake area. And the bag taillight pieces were set aside in the evidence intake processing area. Sergeant Bukhenik and I didn't have access to the permanent evidence locker area. We just secured them in the temporary intake area.
As far as the area that you're talking about with regard to the clothing items and the other items that you secured beyond the cell phones, that was in a secure area of your office, is that correct?
Correct.
By secure, I mean restricted access to the troopers within your unit, correct?
Correct. You need a key card, and it's also equipped with an alarm.
Following that, as far as these items of evidence and other items of evidence that are seized throughout the course of an investigation, how is it that they go, or what is done in between the time that they go from this temporary storage area to the permanent storage area?
Yeah, I'm not an evidence officer. I never have been. My understanding is once it's in the evidence processing area, it gets put into the permanent evidence room that, like I said, 2 troopers and a detective lieutenant have access to. It's the evidence officer's responsibility to process that material when they see fit.
Sir, if I could turn your attention to February 1st of 2022. Were you working in regard to this investigation on that date as well?
Yes.
At some point, did you have occasion to go back to the Canton Police Department, specifically in the Sallyport garage area?
I did.
What was the purpose of you going out to the Sallyport garage on that day?
To a search warrant, we were processing Miss Reed's Lexus.
When you say we, who else was present with you, or who else did you contact in reference to the processing?
So we had a chemist from the State Police Lab, Miss Maureen Hartnett, as well as a trooper from Crime Scene Services, Trooper Zachary Clark. And then later in the day, the accident recon team, Trooper Joe Paul, had arrived as well.
I could just ask you a couple questions in regard to Crime Scene Services section. Can you describe for the jury what their role is in regard to investigations that you do and how they're...
So in any scene, if it's required for it to be documented, Crime Scene Services will arrive. They'll document the scene with photographs. In more serious situations, in a homicide, for instance, they'll actually take video as well as dust for fingerprints.
With respect to this particular investigation, there were a number of different areas or different times when Crime Scene Services was contacted to document, correct?
Yes.
That would include a Good Samaritan when you observed injuries to Mr. O'Keefe.
Correct.
That would include the autopsy that was performed to Mr. O'Keefe.
Yes.
That would include February 1st in the Sallyport garage when the search warrant was executed on the defendant's vehicle. That would include subsequent searches that occurred at Fairview Road, is that correct?
Yes.
With respect to each of those instances, was it ever the same trooper from Crime Scene Services section that came out and memorialized each of those respective areas?
Yeah, it was a different trooper each time.
And is that something that you or any member of your unit has any control over whatsoever as far as who shows up from Crime Scene Services to memorialize or document a scene?
No.
Between the time that you were in the garage on January 29th, 2022, and the time that you're there for the search warrant execution on February 1st, had you been in that Sallyport area of the Canton Police Station at any time in between?
No.
With respect to the taillight area on the passenger side of the defendant's vehicle, what differences or what did you note between your observations of the taillight on the 29th versus your observations on February 1st?
Yeah, the only difference from the 29th to the 1st was snow and ice had melted from the taillight.
So as far as the condition of that particular taillight, was it in essentially the same condition that you observed it on the 29th when you observed it on the 1st?
Yes, it was still broken and large pieces missing from it.
But as far as the broken status of it and the pieces that were missing, was it any more broken or any more pieces missing from it when you saw it on the 1st versus when you saw it on the 29th?
No.
With respect to the taillight housing for that vehicle on that particular day, what happened with it on that day, if you know?
The state police chemist, Ms. Hartnett, had it removed, which she brought to the lab herself.
So she had it removed it herself and then physically took it with her when she left to the lab?
Yeah, it was with the assistance of a Canton police officer who had an auto body shop, so he's well-versed in cars, so he was able to assist the chemist with removing the housing unit.
Now, at any point in time on that day of February 1st, 2022, did you come into contact physically or otherwise with that tail light? Did you handle it in any way, shape, or form?
No.
With the court's permission, if I could publish a portion of Exhibit 34,
Okay.
the Sallyport video, 9:12 a.m. Do you recognize what's...
Yes, that's the Sallyport area Canton Police Department, and Miss Reed's Lexus roped off with a yellow caution tape.
This is the execution of that search warrant that you were speaking about before as far as your presence and some of the other members of the state police and the state police lab that you were talking about.
Correct.
Just ask a couple questions. As far as people within this video, do you anyone in this?
Yeah, myself, at the top of the screen, Trooper Zach Clark, we the one with the camera taking photographs of the vehicle.
Now, to this video from Sally Port Police Department, what did you learn over the course of this in regard to how that was reported or how it's, what if anything activates that video?
Objection.
Ask it differently, Mr.
As far as this video is concerned, is this one continuous time frame that we're looking at or how is it?
Objection.
Sustain.
My understanding, it's motion
That
active.
means you can't answer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can ask a different.
I'm not sure there was anything said.
No.
Oh, all right. I'll strike if there was anything. But, Mr. Lally, just ask a question.
With respect to this video, as far as the recording is set up, how is that activated or how does it record?
Objection.
Yeah. How does he know that? It's sustained.
Have you watched this video or other videos from the Canton Police Department, Sally Port Garage?
Yes.
What did you note with regard to timing as far, there is a timestamp on the video, is that correct?
Yes.
What did you note with regard to the timestamp on this video or the other videos that you observed with regard to time moved throughout the video?
The timestamp on the video tends to pause, indicating it's motion activated.
Last one.
It tends to pause. I'll strike after that.
This film is going to run until about 9:24. With regard to that taillight that was then taken by Ms. Hartnett to the lab, is that correct?
Yes.
At some point, that was returned to the custody of the state police, your detective unit.
Correct.
Do you have that taillight housing with you today in court?
I do.
Would you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that?
I recognize that to be the housing unit.
As far as your recognizing of the housing unit, is there any denotation or anything on the outside of that box indicating what's contained therein?
There's a State Police Crime Lab sticker with the number associated with it. It also indicates fragile evidence tape that is initialed and dated as well for when it's sealed up. The sticker also says passenger side T indicating taillight.
Thank you, sir. And Trooper, you can go ahead and put that back in the box. Thank you very much. Trooper, with respect to that item, that's essentially the condition that you observed it in both on January 29th and February 1st?
Yes.
Trooper Proctor, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
That is the right taillight of Miss Reed's Lexus SUV, and you can see large pieces of it are missing.
That is the same condition that you observed it both on February 1st as well as January 29th, obviously minus the snow and the.
Yeah, minus the snow and ice, sir, yes.
Your attention to February 3rd of 2022. In the morning hours of that date, where did you go in regard to this investigation?
Sergeant Bukhenik, Trooper David Achico, and myself went to Fairview Road along with Trooper Evan Brandt from Crime Scene Services to essentially dig out the snow in pursuit for more evidence.
As far as dig out the snow in pursuit of other evidence, what tools or implements did you and the other troopers bring with you in order to effectuate that on February 3rd?
We just had standard snow shovels.
Prior to that date of February 3rd, 2022, had you been to 34 Fairview Road at any point in time in the course of your investigation?
No,
So that morning of February 3rd, that's the first time that you went.
correct.
How many times did you go to the area of 34 Fairview Road over the course of the next days and weeks in regard to potential recovery of items?
February 3rd, I retrieved items on the 8th, the 11th, and 18th, and we was out there on the 10th with Sergeant Bukhenik as well.
As far as any of those occasions that you just described, that you went to the area of 34 Fairview Road, on any of those occasions were you by yourself?
No,
With respect to those other occasions, what type of people or who was with you? I know you've mentioned on the 3rd, but beyond the 3rd, those other occasions that you described, who was with you?
I believe it was Trooper Chico, based on the handwriting on the evidence bag, recognized his handwriting. And the other 2 dates, I don't recall who was out there with me.
With respect to items that were located, starting with the 3rd, do you recall specifically what items were located on the 3rd?
We've located a black drinking straw, consistent with the one seen in the waterfall video of Mr. O'Keefe walking out of the bar holding the glass. We located his hat that had the American flag that was deep underneath the snow. As we were digging, we discovered that. We further discovered other pieces of plastic as well.
As far as these return trips on successive dates to 34 Fairview Road, what was the reasoning behind that, or what was the plan in reference to why were there so many different dates that you returned to 34 Fairview Road with other trips?
After the 29th, there was close to 2 feet of snow that had fallen. In the days and weeks that had followed, the temperatures ranged from 30 degrees up to 60 degrees. And there was about a half a dozen days mixed in of heavy rain. As the snow started to melt, more evidence started to present itself.
So there were items that you recovered on the 3rd and then items you recovered on successive dates that weren't visible or you didn't see on the 3rd, correct?
Correct.
If I could, keeping you on February 3rd, you mentioned that there was a Trooper Evan Brent that was present with you during the search on that day as well.
Yes.
In addition to going to 34 Fairview Road, where else did yourself and Trooper Brent go on that particular day?
We traveled to One Meadows Ave, Mr. O'Keefe's residence.
Is that the first time that you had been to Meadows Ave or Mr. O'Keefe's residence?
Yes.
With respect to that residence, why is it that you and Trooper Brent went there on February 3rd?
We wanted to document Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle to show that there was no damage to it, as well as the garage doors.
Why did you want to document that?
During the review of Mr. O'Keefe's ring video, particularly the one above the garage that displays the driveway, on the 29th at approximately 5:07 a.m., Ms. Reed's pulling her vehicle out of the garage door, backing up towards Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle, and comes extremely close, if not slightly hitting the vehicle. So we wanted to at least go document that there was no damage to Mr. O'Keefe's car.
Trooper Proctor, with regard to this ring video, how was this obtained?
So we first observed it through Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone on the Ring app, and then I wrote a search warrant for Ring itself.
As far as the videos that you received from Ring, did they match what was viewable being the Ring app on Mr. O'Keefe's?
The videos on Mr. O'Keefe's app, yes, they was what Ring produced, matched.
So as far as any videos that were present that you received pursuant to the search warrant, or any videos that were not present, that was consistent with what you observed on Mr. O'Keefe's app on his phone?
Yes.
Proctor, with regard to this video, you've seen this before, is that correct?
Yes.
Point from this video, are you able to discern who the operator of that vehicle is?
Based off the attire, Ms. Reed driving.
With respect to when that vehicle, the defendant's vehicle, if you could, there's a laser pointer up there. I just ask you to draw their attention to what, if any, vehicles you observe in this video and whose vehicles you believe them.
So right there, it's Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle and Ms. Reed's vehicle.
As far as when those vehicles come close or come into contact with each other, as far as Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle is concerned, what did you observe, like, on Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle at the time?
There's some snow you can see on the back window here, the bumper and the windows here is starting to be covered in snow.
As far as when that vehicle comes close to or makes contact with Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle, what do you observe the snow to come off of the car at that point? With reference to the back area of the vehicle, particularly in the area of the ground, as far as that area on the ground, what did you observe in reference to any red pieces or any pieces of taillight or plastic or glass or anything in that area that you observed on this video?
So this area here is, you can see the white snow. There's no red pieces of taillight, which would show up in the contrast of the white snow.
As far as the damage area that you were discussing previous that you observed in the January 29th in the Sally Port, February 1st in the Sally Port, and then the item that was just marked as evidence, what did you observe in the right rear passenger side taillight area of the defendant's vehicle from this video?
You can see the inconsistent lighting. If you compare it to the left versus the right, there's a gap right there.
What you observed from that video, does that appear to be consistent with what you observed on January 29th at the Canton Police Department, February 1st, and in the item of evidence that was just marked?
Yes.
So you proceeded to One Meadows Ave for the first time on February 3rd, is that correct?
Correct.
Trooper Brent from Crime Scene was with you and took some photographs, is that correct?
Yes.
Trooper, I'm showing you a set of 10 photographs. Do you recognize what's in those photographs?
Yes.
What do you recognize them to be?
The first picture is the front door of Mr. O'Keefe's house, and it's also Mr. O'Keefe's Chevy Traverse.
Do you recognize what's up on the screen? It's now been marked as
Yes, Mr. O'Keefe's Chevy Traverse vehicle.
And with
So that is Mr. O'Keefe's driveway, 2 garage doors there that lead into the house. And above those garage doors is the Ring camera.
Now, with respect to the rear of Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle, from your viewing of the video from Exhibit 6, from the Ring video 5.3, you could, using that laser pointer, direct to where it is on this vehicle that there's contact, if any, between Ms. Reed's vehicle and Mr. O'Keefe's.
It would have been in this general,
And as far as your observations on that.
What's the, hold on.
Trooper, when you were in the driveway of Mr. O'Keefe's residence on February 3rd, 2000, agents make observations of Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle, is that correct?
correct.
What damage did you observe to the driver's side rear area of the vehicle?
I didn't observe any significant damage or any damage.
As far as the entirety of the vehicle, that was all
Yes,
memorial to you, is that correct?
correct.
As far as your observations on that day or in those photographs, what damage did you observe?
I did not observe any damage.
So there's another 8 photographs that I placed before you. Have you had a chance to review those?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize what's depicted in those 8 photographs?
Yes.
What do you recognize those to be?
More photographs of Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle as well as the garage doors.
And if you could describe to the jury what we're looking at in
The rear bumper area of Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle,
that the driver's side or the passenger side.
the driver's side.
What damage did you observe that?
No damage.
Sir, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, those are the 2 garage doors of Mr. O'Keefe's house.
And what's contained up on that screen, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what observed in Mr. Garage doors on February 3rd?
Yes.
With respect to those garage doors, what damage did you note or observe on those garage doors at any point when you were there?
Did not observe any damage to the garage doors.
Trooper Proctor, subsequent dates following February 3rd, specifically February 8th, 11th, and 18th. Did you have occasion to return to 34 Fairview Road on those days?
I did.
You had mentioned a little bit about changes in the weather. What evolved as far as the weather was concerned between the dates of February 3rd when you were there and February 8th, 11th, and 18th?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the weather pattern had fluctuated from 30 degrees up to 60 degrees with a handful of days of heavy rain mixed in, so that caused a lot of snow to melt as well.
With respect to each of those respective days of February 8th, 11th, and 18th, what did you observe or recover, you and the other troopers that were present on those days?
Yeah, it was further evidence that was originally buried under the snow. Because of the warm temperature and the rain and the snow melting, revealed itself more pieces of plastic, clear and red.
With respect to the residence at 34 Fairview Road, each of these times that you were at the residence, including February 3rd, where in relation to the house were these items observed and recovered by you and the other troopers on those respective?
So if you're looking at 34 Fairview, looking at the front of the house, it's to the left side of the property between the flagpole and kind of the fire hydrant, in that general area, the front left of the property.
With regard to these 3 subsequent dates, as far as February 8th, 11th, and 18th, these items that were observed and recovered on those dates, where were they in relation to the roadway? Where were they in relation to the hydrant, the flagpole, other markers in the area?
I don't specifically remember exactly if they were around the flagpole, because the CERT team came and shoveled an area around. That stuff had melted first because there was a lot less snow, and then they created more piles. But as far as the general area was by the flagpole and fire hydrant, it wasn't like on the other side of the property. It was in that general area.
Just with respect to those items, were they generally found, or were they specifically found either on the grass or the roadway area?
Grass
Asphalt
area.
grass is basically what I'm asking.
Grass area.
With regard to each of those items that were recovered on those 3 successive dates, as far as February 8th, 11th, and 18th, did you bring those items with you to court today as well?
I did.
You recognize that bag, sir?
I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
That's an evidence bag containing 3 smaller evidence bags.
In succession, if I could ask you to please open the bag with respect to February 8th first. With respect to that bag, what indication is there as to the contents therein?
It says taillight, 1 large piece of plastic, color red, 1 small piece of red plastic, and 1 piece of black plastic, located 4th Road, lawn, left side.
Thank you, sir. If you could please remove those. And sir, you can place those back in the bag. Sir, if I could ask you to retrieve the bag of items that were seized on February 11th. If you could read to the jury what the description is in regard to that evidence bag.
So it's 2 on the 11th. This one is described as glass fragments. Can't tell how many pieces. It's been taped over. The second bag from the 11th says 3 pieces of clear plastic, 5 pieces of red plastic. With a smaller bag in here containing the glass. Cut that open as well.
I think that's sufficient.
All right.
Yes, Your Honor. All right. These items appear to be just further on sealed up and wrapped up and
Do you want him to open every one, Mr. Jackson?
May I approach?
Yes.
I can't see that far.
sir. If you could get those back. Lastly, sir, with regard to the back from February 18th, again, if you could read to the jury what's indicated as far as the contents therein.
Several pieces of red and clear plastic.
Thank you, sir. If you could return those items to the back. Trooper, with regard to each of those items from 8th, 11th, and 18th, those are all items that you recovered from the front lawn area of Fairview Road, is that correct?
Correct.
What was just displayed to the jury is that essentially the condition that they were in when you recovered them on those respective dates.
Yes.
I could turn your attention just briefly regarding the search warrants in regard to the ring video from Mr. O'Keefe's. Was that one search warrant or more than one search warrant that you did in respect to those ring videos?
There was a second search warrant for the ring videos for Mr. O'Keefe's house.
If you recall, what was the general time frame that was asked for in that warrant as far as from what date to what date?
The second one, I believe, was January 30th to the 3rd or the 4th, I believe.
Was the first one essentially from the 24th to the 29th?
Yes.
With respect to the video that you received in regard to the first search warrant to ring, beyond the video itself, what other information did you receive as far as accounts or?
It was just confirming that the user account was under Mr. O'Keefe's email, and then there was an Excel file where you have to transcribe. So each video has about a 17-digit number associated with it, unique identifier. You take that 17-digit number and you got to convert it using these Excel files to get the date and time.
With respect to what you received pursuant to the search warrant from Ring, was there any kind of activity log? What I mean by that, what information did you receive as far as what devices or how many different devices were able to access that footage?
Yeah, I wasn't able to obtain a activity log of who was using the device, what device was accessing the system. Someone logged in. I was not provided with any record of who was logging in on what day or time.
Are you familiar with what's referred to as a digital footprint?
Yes.
With respect to the Ring videos in totality that you received and that you also viewed pursuant to the app on Mr. O'Keefe's phone, were there certain time periods where you would have expected to see video in which there was no?
Yes.
Can you describe for the jurors when those time periods were?
The Ring camera above Mr. O'Keefe's garage, pretty sensitive, so it does not have Miss Read arriving back at Mr. O'Keefe's house around 12:30 is approximately when she should have arrived. The only video, there's a gap from approximately 11:45 p.m. on the 28th to about 5:07 a.m. on the 29th when Miss Read's backing out. It never has her pulling into the garage. There's also a second video of Miss Roberts, Miss McCabe, and Miss Read looking at the broken taillight in the morning.
What follow-up or inquiry did you make of Ring in regard to those missing videos?
I inquired several different times as far as if a video is deleted, is there some type of a record?
That was his inquiry, but next question, I'll allow that.
As far as that term that you used before, as far as a digital imprint, can you explain to the jury what you understand that term to mean?
Essentially, a digital footprint is if a video is created, it's going to leave some type of a record in the archives.
What information did you receive from Ring as far as their system is concerned in regard to a digital footprint?
Not what anybody told you, but what you received.
That if a video is deleted,
The objection sustained.
Move to strike.
I'm going to strike that.
In your further inquiry of Ring, were you ever able to obtain any video from those specific sections where you anticipated video would be?
no.
Sir, if I could turn your attention to January 16th, 2024. Do you recall that date?
I do not, sir.
At some point over the course of your investigation, were you made aware of forensic evidence in relation to the housing that was introduced earlier as an exhibit?
Yes.
With respect to that, at some point, did you have occasion to meet with a Sergeant Brian Gallerani of the Needham Police Department?
Yes.
Where was that?
In the DA's office.
Who else involved in this investigation as far as yourself? Was Sergeant Bukhenik with you there as well?
Yes.
What did Sergeant Gallerani do with respect to yourself and Sergeant Bukhenik on that date in January of 2020?
Sergeant Bukhenik and I voluntarily provided our DNA for comparison testing.
That was a voluntary decision that both you and Sergeant Bukhenik made as far as availing yourself or availing of that particular testing.
Correct.
As far as the testing, can you describe for the jury how that sample was collected or how it was conducted?
Essentially, it's just a swab of the mouth under the tongue with it's basically just like a little pad on a stick, and you get swabbed. That's how the DNA or saliva is collected.
And as far as those samples that were collected from both yourself and Sergeant Bukhenik on that particular day, where did they go from there as far
It
as
was my understanding, went to the Bodie lab in Virginia.
prior to that, as far as when they left from the room that you were in with Sergeant Gallerani, Did you take those swabs, or did Sergeant Ronnie take those swabs,
No.
or where did they go?
Sergeant Gallerani took possession of those items.
Thank you. Over the course of your investigation, you interviewed a number of different witnesses, correct?
Yes.
Were there witness interviews that were conducted outside of your presence in the sense that you weren't there for those particular witness interviews?
Yes.
Each of the interviews that you're aware of, whether they were conducted by you or outside of your presence, were done, with the exception of the current, done with more than one trooper present, correct?
Correct.
With respect to those witness interviews that you were present for, from the witnesses that you spoke with, along with other troopers that were present with you, who of those witnesses had you met or did you know prior to the interview that you conducted?
Well, the witnesses that I interviewed, the only individuals that I know or had met prior to this investigation was Julie, Chris Albert, and Colin Albert.
And how is it that you knew Julie Albert, Christopher Albert, and Colin?
My sister, Courtney, her friend growing up, Jillian. Jillian's sister's Julie. My sister got to know Julie Albert, Julie Daniels is her maiden name, through her friend Jillian. Julie married Chris Albert, so my sister got to know Chris through Jillian and Julie. And years down the road, my sister had Julie babysit my nephew. Julie would come from time to time and pick up my nephew from school, so that's how they became friendly. On occasion, they would be over at my sister's house or at my parents' backyard. Julie and Chris and their kid Colin, I would happen to be there.
Where did you grow up?
Canton.
Did you graduate from high school?
Yes.
As far as any of the witnesses that you interviewed, even the Alberts that you were just talking about, Christopher, Julie, and Colin Albert, were they around the same ages as you or went to high school with you at the same time?
No.
How much older than you would Julie and Chris Albert?
At least 10 years.
As far as Colin Albert, what's the age difference between yourself and him?
At least 20.
Fair to say around this time of January 22, do you know how old Colin was or what level of school he was at that point?
Senior in high school, I believe.
Is that something that you learned through this investigation or something that you knew independently?
Something I learned through this investigation.
Obviously, you grew up in Canton and your sister did as well.
Yes.
Your sister's name is Courtney, is that correct?
Correct.
And what is the age difference between yourself and your sister Courtney?
She's 2 years older than me.
How close are you and your sister?
She's probably one of my best friends. We talk about 5-6 times a day about anything and everything as far as mostly our children.
How many children does your sister?
She's got 2.
And about how old are they?
And 7.
You have children as well?
I do.
How old are they?
2 and 4.
With respect to the conversation that you have with your sister about 5 or 6 times a day, how do you have those conversations? Is it voice call or in person or text or if you know?
Everything. Got FaceTime, phone calls, text messages. We're always keeping each other up to date on mainly our kids.
As far as Julie and Christopher Albert, when did you interview them in relation to this incident?
Sometime in February. I'd have to look at my report for the exact date.
Sometime in, say, early to mid-February?
Yes.
Who else was present with you when you interviewed?
Sergeant
Do
Bukhenik.
you recall where the interview took place?
Yes, it was at their home.
Prior to this date that you went over to interview Christopher and Julie Albert, had you ever been over to that house before?
No.
Had you ever been over to any home where Christopher and Julie Albert had resided then or previously prior to that date?
No.
Had Christopher or Julie Albert, to your knowledge, ever been over to your house?
No.
With respect to Christopher and Julie Albert, and Colin Albert, we'll throw him in there as well, how would you describe your relationship with them prior to January 29th, 2000?
I'd classify it as acquaintances.
All right. Mr. Lally, why don't we take our luncheon break?